Good morning, everyone.
I got my book already.
Full book, not too. Morning, Johnny.
Good morning. You had a fatality on 66 this morning.
I know, I heard. I heard it shut it down.
We're going to resume the workshop portion of our meeting. I know that yesterday was a very tough day. I know in North Carolina and Virginia, and I was going to ask our Deputy Commissioner, Rob Carey, just to give us an update on how things are regarding Florence.
Madam Secretary, members of the board, yesterday was we started out hopeful that we would get by better than we did, and unfortunately yesterday we had 2 deaths in Virginia. We had a tornado victim in Chesterfield County, and we had last night in Louisa County a car in a flash flood, a victim in a car drowned. So very unfortunate. So we unfortunately, I think you can say, added 2 people to those totals for the storm. We were fortunate yesterday in one regard with one of our facilities. The Chesterfield residency was impacted by a tornado, trees down. The resident engineer's car, or Ford Explorer, was crushed. Some of you may have seen that picture of a big tree across his car. Trees on buildings there, but they did not actually penetrate the roofs or anything. So I think we're in okay shape there. But that was literally within a mile or so of the location where the person was killed by the tornado. I can't say exactly how many tornadoes there were. It may have been one that touched down multiple times or a number of different tornadoes, but I've seen reports of up to 12 different spots where it may have hit. This morning we have 259 roads closed, 59 in Richmond District, 61 in Stanton, 40 in Lynchburg, 34 in Culpeper, 34 in Salem, and 18 in Bristol, and the other districts less than that. They're quickly opening those up as fast as they can, but obviously with power lines entangled in the trees and so forth, they can only go as fast as the power companies are able to support that. And of course, the power companies are dealing with some stuff in North Carolina as well. We also this morning, just separate from the storm, we had a major crash with a fatality on 66 in Northern Virginia that was blocking most of that roadway for a good section of the morning, so it had backups up to 14 miles. I would also say that last night, and I'm sure the Secretary may talk about this, we were asked to supply some assistance to North Carolina by their Secretary of Transportation. We're working on that today to help out down there. So that's where we stand. As I said, unfortunately, we were hoping yesterday we wouldn't see any of those pop-up tornadoes or flooding, and we ended up seeing it in 2 places. So a storm like that's always unpredictable, but that's where we stand today. If y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I will just, our thoughts are also with our colleagues over in Richmond at the residency and, Patrick Henry in the Capitol, who actually spent a very long time in stairwells yesterday. So thank you for that update. It is true that last evening, US DOT actually reached out on behalf of the Secretary of Transportation, Jim Drogden, in North Carolina, that they are having a huge issue with communications and getting communications out. So Marshall Herman is on her way. She's being driven back to figure out how to get down to Raleigh, and I think we'll be offering some further assistance in that arena. It turns out that communications is one of the biggest issues, trying to reach people during this time. So as we learn, we'll let you all know as well. So unless are there any thoughts or questions? Okay, with that, I thought after the commissioner's presentation, specifically dealing with Route 7 yesterday, that before we got into questions, it might be helpful for Nick to do his presentation on policy recommendations, and then kind of do a combined session for Q&A afterwards.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, Nick Donahue, Deputy Secretary of Transportation. As you all may recall, when we met in Alexandria and discussed the Route 7 issue and you all voted on that, there was a request by the board that staff come back and develop a draft policy for your consideration at this meeting on how these instances would be handled in the future. And so working with the commissioner, we've developed a 4 different recommendations that we'd like to discuss with you all this morning, get your feedback on, and bring a revised resolution for your consideration in our October meeting. There's, as I've noted, 4 different pieces. The first is that upfront in the smart scale process, prior to the release of scores, VDOT would conduct additional reviews of certain types of projects. First, any project that cost over $50 million would have the district review, as every project does today, but then would also undergo a more thorough and rigorous examination at the central office level with a different set of eyes just to review those types of estimates. And I think it was noted yesterday, being off 20% on a $5 million project is not good, but it's $1 million. Being off 20% on a $100 million project is very bad, and it's $20 million. And so again, any of these larger scale projects would automatically undergo this additional review, again, before scores are even released, so that we can modify the estimates as necessary. In addition to that, VDOT would work through internal policies to establish kind of certain thresholds in general for project types based on their size, scale, and other factors. And any project that looks like it kind of falls out of that, either higher or lower, would be subject to an additional review. And again, prior to the scores, and estimates would be updated or revised as necessary at the outset of this process, and again, prior to any release of scores. And so that's something that we were recommending be put in place at the very beginning as we do the other validation of projects that goes through today, where we look at project readiness and other things of that nature. Secondly, we're recommending that after projects are selected, VDOT report quarterly on whether there have been any changes to the projects that have been selected in any round of smart scale that increase dramatically the risk of that project and the risk of meeting the estimate that was used for the basis of allocating funds to that project. And again, the very discrete example that should be fresh in your mind is Washington Gas is now undertaking this very, very large project in close proximity to ours, which creates risk for our project, risk for the contractor, risk for interaction and other difficulties of that nature. So VDOT would again develop internal policies outlining the types of risks they would look for and would report to you all quarterly on that. And again, there may be instances where there's nothing to report, but I suspect there will be many instances where there is something to report, where risks have developed since those projects were selected, but prior to them really going out to bid, so that we have that information in advance before it goes out, and we're not in a situation where this bubbles up at the receipt of bids. The last 2 items are what happens if those 2 safeguards don't catch the problem and don't resolve the issue. And so the project comes in, it exceeds the existing smart scale policy for things that can be handled administratively and requires to come back to the board because the overage is over the percentages that were established. And again, that generally means it's more than $1 million off. In those instances, projects need to come back to the board in most cases. What we are recommending then is that when you all are notified that a project is over, before you are ever asked to consider what action you may wish to take on that, the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment will provide several things to the board. The first is a revised smart scale score. So what would that project have scored in the round of smart scale it was selected in if it had had that higher cost at that time? We will also provide a list of projects that were funded in that round that scored lower than this revised smart scale score, if any. And then we will also rerun the funding scenario to tell you what would have happened if, in that round of smart scale if we had known that higher cost up front, so that you can see what the impacts were of this project being selected with a cost estimate that ended up being incorrect as we move forward. And we would give you a list of any projects that would be impacted that were funded or that were not selected for funding but could have been had we known that higher cost in advance. And again, you would be given that information when you were made aware of the fact that the bids came in over, so well in advance of you all considering whether you wish to pull the plug on the project or to allocate district grant money or high priority projects money to that project. And finally, we would also tell you how much district grant money is available and unallocated in that district, and how much high priority projects money is available and unallocated statewide. So you could have that information again at least a month in advance to consider your options before we come back and ask you for action on that project and determine what its fate may be. And then the final item is, again, when that instance is triggered and a project comes in over bid, is that VDOT will produce an after-action report going through the project as the commissioner did yesterday, looking at where the estimates were accurate, where they were not quite as accurate, and other things that we believe led to this instance, and as, if appropriate or necessary, develop any policies to try and address those situations moving forward in the future to reduce such frequencies.
One question, is not quite as accurate is the same thing as inaccurate?
A matter of style.
Madam Chair? Having kind of lived through this, I appreciate all the work and the thinking. The one thing that I would suggest maybe you add to your list, Nick, related to the information that comes to the CTB, that, you know, okay, we really have a serious problem, here's how much money is left. I think the last piece that we need in that is also how many other at-risk things are hanging out there that we need to consider. So we have a sense of what the whole risk pool in the next, say, 12 to 18 months might be.
No, and I think the quarterly report will give us that information, but I think we can make sure that's compiled and given to you when you're considering the fate of a particular project.
Commissioner, haven't you started that process?
I'd say is yes, as I said yesterday, we do have 43 projects on what I'll call the at-risk projects, and those are certainly all of the projects that we've looked at to date, whether they're in the scoping phase or they're at other milestones in the project phase. I'd say that we're well on the way. Many of the items that the Deputy Secretary talked about are those controls that we've already started putting into place. They'll be refined as the process goes along. We are approaching some of those milestones that was said that we're going to need to be in a position that we're going to need to make some very hard decisions as to whether the project moves forward into the next phase or the milestone, probably at the next meeting. So we'll certainly get that information out well in advance of the next meeting so that we could have a very good dialogue on the particular projects that are at risk.
Yes, of course.
Yesterday, you mentioned in the Route 7 presentation that we had been sort of given a risk assessment last year by the VDOT commissioner. When you give your risk assessments, how can we more accurately be aware of the crisis ahead? I mean, I don't recall. I looked in my notes. I looked at the meetings. I don't recall the details of how we were notified during that presentation. You need a sledgehammer? You need something to sort of wake us up? I mean, I guess it's a matter of style, but.
I think at the October board meeting, I think this is going to be one of those times that we're going to need to feel our way through. Many of these projects that I feel that are at risk are at the very early stages of the project development phase. Route 7, in my opinion, was much further along. We were already heading down the design-build path. We had a design in place. We knew a fairly accurate cost estimate at that point in time. These projects that you're going to see and experience are in the pre-scoping or the scoping phase, and as I said, don't have a lot of engineering associated with it, so we're going to have to watch them migrate through every step of the way through the development process leading up to the bid. I think you're going to see in some of these projects that I bring before you in October, there are some projects that, and I'll give an example, there's one in the city of Suffolk right now that has a right-of-way cost that jumped $7 million. That is a project that is probably going to be at risk, and that will be, truthfully, a sledgehammer, to use your term, that we're going to need to deal with. There are other ones that are subtle examples that we are $300,000–400,000 over. They do trigger the smart scale reevaluation. Is that an opportunity then for the locality to be able to put additional money onto that project to be able to make it, let it advance through the process? But this is going to be an ongoing effort on a quarterly basis, and if we need to do it more frequently, we'll certainly do it more frequently to bring it back to the board so that you are aware as we go through this that those estimates are changing.
But Mr. Collins, I would also add, I think what happened with Route 7 has happened in the past. What is different this time is we now have smart scale. We have distinct rounds of funding. Projects are held much more tightly to their budgets. And in the past, because of the way we allocated funds and the liquidity in the program, if you'll call it, with so many partially funded projects where if a project ran over, you could, oh, well, we'll just take the PE funding from this project in year 6 because, well, it's just PE. It doesn't even have construction. It's 6 years away. Who knows what that is? And I think we talked a lot over the last several years about Smart Scale does a lot with the board on how you all pick projects. But on the flip side, it also does a ton to the department now where every project has a discrete budget. When things go over now, the first thing is not where do I find money, it's how do I change the project to still get the same benefits for less cost. That's a paradigm shift in the department. And so I think Route 7s have happened in the past. The way we program, though, has changed so dramatically that the impacts of a Route 7 happening today are much more, they're felt a lot more by the board. And so I think we've all learned from the Route 7 experience. I think these new policies are going to give us the visibility, and we've all seen the issues, I'll call it, that are created when a Route 7 happens under this new programming paradigm that we have in place. And so I think moving forward, as long as this information is provided, we've now gone through that experience. It was the first time we'd really gone through it under a Smart Scale, and I think we now all have a much greater understanding and respect for the implications.
And Mr. Connors, I will just say that once we were made aware of this, we immediately informed the board at the next meeting that there was an issue. And then having to delve through this so that we're presenting accurate information. When we learned it, that of course also alerted us to the fact that there could be others out there. So we're working through the process as well. And I thought perhaps I'd just ask Mr. Whitworth and Mr. Malbin, because of giving input to Nick and developing this policy, what your thoughts might be.
Well, my concerns that I expressed last month were twofold. One, of course, we need to make sure that the board is involved at the front end of a problem and that there's very clear transparency. And the other is that we not let the Route 7 decision be a guideline for future decisions. We weren't setting a precedent. So they were the two things that were on my plate. The one thing that I wanted to make sure that we know is during the continuum of a project, more and more money is spent. And at any given time, to pull the plug, there is a loss of some amount of money. And we need to know, one, the loss of pulling the plug versus the amount of money to make the project go forward. I think that's a very key point in making a good decision.
We can add that, I think, both to the quarterly report to say what has been spent to date, and if, again, the early safeguards fail us and we do receive a bid that's over, when we come back to you kind of saying, do you want to pull the plug on this project or fund it, we can tell you how much has been spent up to date at that point, because you are right.
And what would be lost?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
To that point, what I'd say is that that quarterly document that I'll provide in October is already doing that, because there is that repayment that if we go down this path and we start paying or start expending preliminary engineering money, there is a repayment. If we get into the right-of-way phase, there's going to be a repayment. So having that knowledge of how far do we go before we make this decision is going to be a key.
I think the policy changes significantly address my concerns. Smart Scale makes it a different process now. If you remember, before Smart Scales, we used to put money on projects like we put right-of-way on money, we put utilities on, put engineering on. So we were tinkering with the project, and over the period of allocating that money and getting the information as a result of that, gave us a better idea of what the final costs were. And obviously, our initial estimate, we were impacted as we moved through that process. Smart Scale makes it totally different now, because when we elect that project, we put money on it to the completion, and it puts more of a responsibility on us to be much more diligent in the estimating. And And as a result, more transparency that when we find these irregularities that were communicated to, and as a board, we're able to adjust and either fund it or make other recommendations.
Madam Secretary. I agree with John's comments. We can't hide these things anymore as we used to, so this is great that we're having this dialogue. But Steve, I had a specific question on some of the comments you made yesterday, and this, to Nick's point, you know, I think we've figured out what's happened in the past, and the question is how we avoid these issues in the future. And yesterday, in describing what happened with Route 7, you pretty much characterized what I call the estimator's dilemma, and that is, how do you deal with uncertain information? And I guess one of the takeaways I got from that is that we're going to continue to have a high degree of uncertainty in the projects that come through Smart Scale because of the early phase that we're estimating. And the only offset to uncertainty, I guess in my view, is sophisticated contingency development. And so I guess my question really is, when we put together a proposal like Route 7, an cost estimate like Route 7 going forward, how sophisticated is our contingency analysis on a line item basis to offset some of the things that you've described? I guess my past experience is that the more you break that down and refine it, and then talk about the range of variability in each of those categories. For instance, we've estimated utilities at X. The worst case scenario is it could be Y. The probability of that is 30%. I mean, very sophisticated contingency models can be built. What is our process there, and is that an independent process from the cost estimating?
I think we're very early in on the process, but what I'm coming into this right now is from the Smart Scale scope development process, we're identifying what the key elements of the project are and the risks that are associated with it. If it's environmental risk, our location design staff and our district staff are working together to be able to help identify what we think would be an appropriate contingency attached to that particular risk item. Technology may be another key component. It's going to be an evolutionary type approach because we are building those budgets and estimates at very early stage, and we're going to have to migrate through it. The right-of-way risk assessment, we're going to need to take a look at what the market is doing at that point in time, and a little bit of a crystal ball to figure out what that's going to be in 4 to 5 years or 6 years out. That's why I'm saying that for us being able to put this on the table today on a quarterly basis, it's going to be evolutionary. We don't have that crystal ball right now.
You never will, I guess, is my point. But I guess my question is more one of process and what we're currently doing, what we might want to do. Do we have a uniform contingency analysis guideline that every district uses in preparation of their bid or their cost estimates? Are we all using the same model and applying the same metrics to those models?
Trying to apply the same model right now, but I think there's an opportunity to evolve that model based upon the specific project that's at hand. It's going to have to get more robust. That's one of the items that we're looking at right now is working with a consultant to be able to identify major market shifts and predict what those market shifts may be, to be able to accommodate that as risk items back into the estimate development. And the discussions have just started.
And I know that your estimating is very transparent. Is there, or I guess I'll ask, should there be a separate document that identifies what the contingency analysis was and how it was calculated? I just, in the context of what you said yesterday, those variables are not going to change. We're going to have right-of-way risk, we're going to have utility risk, we're going to have timing risk, we're going to have steel tariff risk. I think we would benefit perhaps from, when we look at an estimate, identifying what constitutes the 10 or 15 or 20% or 30% in some cases contingencies that you've applied to that contract.
Something that I'll bring back to the board and give a report back to what that might look like and where we're going to go with cost estimating then.
Madam Secretary, getting back, Smart Scale is forcing us to look at our processes and adapt and change to reflect the issues we had in Route 7. I'm going back prior to Smart Scale when we used to incrementally put money on a project. Sometimes, getting to Dixon's point, there's a lot of money that was spent that was never got to a project. I think that's one of the benefits of smart scale. I know personally in Virginia Beach, there's a lot of projects that a ton of money has been spent on over the years, and the projects never come to fruition. And also the delays of those, whether it's political or prioritization or whatever, sometimes you have to go back and respend the money. You have to redesign. And smart scale eliminates a lot of that waste that we currently had, but it also is forcing us to revisit our process. So when we fund a project, we do it with some confidence that that we're accurate in our.
Yeah, just one more comment. When you look at how our model develops for sophisticated contingency develop, I would ask you to look at the possibility of having that be an independent process. If one group does the estimating, another group does the contingency development based on some standards that we apply across the Commonwealth.
Under consideration.
Thank you. I believe yesterday you mentioned that there was about 12 projects that you may be recommending that we don't move forward with based on.
Out of the 42 projects, we have 2 projects, or 12 projects that we will be bringing back to the board for consideration, whether it's additional funds or potentially canceling those projects in totality. Those 12 are what I'll term at the greatest risks, are at critical milestones for making the determination of whether we continue in the PE phase or the right-of-way phase. So yes, there are 12 projects. We have 4 additional projects that appear to have some risk elements to them. Those, once scoping is closed, will determine whether they're recoverable or not at that point in time. If part of that, we will bring back to you how much money has been spent and where they are in the milestone basis.
Oh, thank you. And I know Nick talked about what we'll do, how we'll look at it. We'll go back and we'll rescore and evaluate. But I may have missed this. Did you talk about, or has any consideration been given to, so if we don't move forward with the project, how are we going to utilize those funds and the process involved in arriving at that decision?
Madam Chair, Mr. Tunk, the way the policy is written today, those funds would go back into whatever pot from which they came. And so, for example, if the board had made the decision to pull the plug on Phase 2 of Route 7, I believe that had a mix of district grant funds and high priority project funds, and those funds, from wherever they came from, would have just returned there and then would have been made available potentially in the next round or held over for other projects that are at risk selected in that round of smart scale. And again, those would be decisions that ultimately would come back to the board.
We could look at going back to projects that would have been funded if the.
I think the way the policy is written now is you would not,
looking forward,
on an ad hoc basis, select an individual project at that time. Rather, the next round of smart scale with the projects that were all scored, those funds would be available at that time. It's what is the way the current policy, my recollection, is drafted. And again, and the policy is a policy of the board, so it's not in law.
So if we found out early in the process that there was a project like this, say 6 months in, smart scale's a year and a half away, and we wait for a year and a half. So, under the current policy.
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, that is correct. I would note, though, that the funds we allocate in smart scale are in the outer years of the program. And so again, round 1 was a bit of an anomaly because we didn't allocate any projects for capital expansion of the system for a 2-year period. And so in the first round of smart scale, we had money in previous years 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the second round of smart scale, we were actually allocating funds in years 5 and 6 of that current 6-year program, and the same thing will be the case for round 3. Now there are project schedules may make it so that it could be year 3, 4, and 5, but typically those funds will be at the end. So I'm going through this long-winded response to tell you that we're not at risk of inflationary or losing value of those dollars because they're not in present day. So we don't have that kind of risk we used to have with the projects being allocated by phase and then waiting and inflationary costs reducing the value of those funds.
Is there any risk of slowing down any project in terms of planning or getting things together or whatever if you wait that extra year and a half?
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, my answer would be no, but I'm sure there will be an exception to that. But as a general rule, I think, no, that would not be the case, but,
You're basically saying there's a lot of risk to do it, though, to follow the current policy.
sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams?
Well, just my last words on Route 7 would be, number one, I appreciate, John, that you said that this wouldn't be a precedent, you hoped, or maybe Dixon said that, because I think we made a mistake approving it anyway. So I really am glad to hear we won't do it again, or try to avoid it. But all you got to do is go back to yesterday's presentation and read the timeline that the commissioner gave us to, I mean, if you read the timeline, I don't think, maybe all of you wouldn't have voted to go do it again. I mean, it was a $300 million project, you know, for what, how many years? It sit in there for 4 years like that. And then we do the first estimates, 278, so we cut it in half to attract more bidders. You would do that to lower the price, is the reason you'd want more bidders in the world I always operated in. Then they applied for the funds at 254, the price went down. Then we combined it to save money. You split it to save money, then you combine it to save money. Estimate comes in, you're told, no, just go do it for 234 regardless. That's going to be your application. That's the one that's going to pass. And then we're at 326. I mean, it was, something went on in here that wasn't right. And hopefully it was just simple mistakes. I mean, but something went right about this thing the whole time. And to turn around and build it, I felt was a mistake. But I agree with the majority of the board that they voted for it for the right reasons. But I'm really happy to hear this is not the precedent. Because even if it's on the street that I drive on every day, I wouldn't want you to do this project, given that history.
Worth.
The process that you indicated where we would rescore based on the new information, and at the same time, I believe you said we would look at other projects, that how those other projects would have scored against this project.
We would redo the smart scale score for that project with the correct cost.
Right.
And then we would compare we would examine the impacts that the new score would have on which other projects would have been funded, if any, and which would not have been funded, if any.
And at that point, where we now know that this project would not have scored well or would not have been selected, am I hearing you say that there is no consideration to activating a project that would have been selected at that point?
Madam Chair, Mr. Whitworth, if you all were to, I believe, I'm saying this back to you to make sure I've correctly understood your question. You are saying, should the board in the next instance of one of these 12 projects that come back to you all in October, you decide you're pulling the plug in all 12, just so I don't get my math wrong here, and that gives you, they're $10 million each, so that's $120 million. As the current policy stands, those funds would go back to the pot in which they came from and would be available, one, for other cost overruns that happen in between the next round of smart scale and now, or available at a later date in a future round of smart scale. That is how the board's current policy is written. It is a board's policy. The board has the ability to revise its policies and to put in place new policies and do other things. I would just state that I think we may, if we're considering making a change to that, we may want to have discussions with local governments who are preparing applications for a future round of smart scale, because priorities may have changed since a previous round or something else of that nature. Law does require that you can only fund a project evaluated by smart scale, so under the law, you would have the right to change the policy and say, hey, if we canceled 120 million, like, let's go have fun, let's allocate this 120 million to projects that have previously been scored and may have been funded if this one was not previously funded. You do have that right. I just think we would need to have some communications with local governments who are then also preparing applications for the next round, and because that would influence, I think, what they submit in that round and other things that as they plan out their processes and selections.
If this were found early in the process, it could be 2 years before it comes around again. I'm just wondering whether or not we don't want to hem ourselves in too much to consider funding another project.
Madam Chair, Mr. Whitworth, it's 2 years from vote to vote. It is not 2 years from application development and submittal by local governments, scores being released. And so if you look at like, you vote in June, 18 months after that, you have scores. And at that point, we kind of have a general sense of what's going to be funded again. So it's not a full 2-year window. And local governments are actually submitting projects now, I believe, 9 months after we vote is when they first start submitting projects again. And so I would say it is 2 years from vote to vote, but there's not a lack of activity during that 2-year window. There's a whole host of things that your communities within your districts are undertaking in that window there. And again, I'd say the only real lull, if that's what you'd like to call it, is that 9-month period. And candidly, what I'm starting to see is local governments are actually working at a staff level with the districts to identify what they may want to prepare so that when the March application portal opens up, some folks are already filling in applications today. And so I think it's kind of a continuous process, I guess is really my point.
Process. I don't know what dollars we're looking at if out of these 12 projects, you know, we're looking at having $600 million available for smart scale. And I don't
800 million.
800. And I don't know what these projects represent and how that is going to inform.
And the other thing that the policy states, and again, the board may be leaning in a particular direction where this aspect of the policy is moot. And again, I say may because I cannot read all of your minds, but just based on the discussion, it appears that you all are kind of generally saying in the future we may be pulling plugs more often than we're offering lifeboats or things of that nature. But if you pull the plug in these 12 and then you go allocate all of these funds, there's going to be a 13th at some point that you may wish to save. And if you spend every extra dollar, you will have very limited abilities to send out the lifeboat in the storm, so to speak. And so that was one of the other reasons the policy was written, where when something came in under, we didn't come back to you and say, hey, there's $5 million. The next project in line was this one right here. Let's go spend it, because we know some are going to be under, we know some are going to be over, and we do need a little bit of slack in the program to cover some of those. A lot of projects that come in over by 3%, which could be a few $100,000. And again, the policy you all have approved says that administratively, Kim Pryor moves some money onto that project. We come back and tell you about it the month afterwards, and we all go forward. But if you all were to start programming every dollar of liquidity from those future rounds, something comes over $300,000, they don't have any money to put there. And so I would just say that I think there's some implications of spending this money the second it becomes available that I think we would need to discuss in more detail and with some real examples here before, I think we should consider making any substantive changes to that, because there are implications that could be very serious.
So Nick, does that mean that when we've been programming smart scale money historically, if we had, let's say we had 800 million, did we program the whole 800 million, or did we program 750 so we had 50 of contingency?
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, we do program the whole amount with the...
There's no lifeboat once we program. There's just a lifeboat if we free some up.
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, no, the basis is we believe that in every batch there will be some that come in under and some that come in over. The ones that come in under create that slack kind of in that system, so to speak. And there is an ultimate lifeboat that is has real consequences to it, which is you can go into the next round of smart scale and say, hey, instead of 800 million, we're going to take 20 million out of this. We now have 780 million.
Does it follow then, if you played this out, that you, this 120 million for the 12 projects, the numbers that we're talking about, if we program that all immediately, if you will, you're in the same boat you were in before, because it's all programmed. There's going to be some unders, there's going to be some overs in the 120, just like there's going to be some in the rest of it. And don't you end up back in the same place?
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, I understand the argument you're making, but I think what you're doing in that instance is that is some of the slack, and you're just taking it all. So we still have, I think we've selected approximately 310 or 20 or so projects. I believe we have only awarded a minority of those at this time. And so I would say that we still have more coming in and that are going to be over and under. And I just think you're pulling the slack out mid-course. We haven't even allocated or awarded all the projects from round one, and that would just be what would create the concern for staff, because you're also allocating money that's available in certain years, which is when we'll need it to cover those overages. That's why borrowing from a future round, one, it reduces the amount available in a future round, but you also then create timing issues where you could end up slowing down a project, because if it's gone to bid, the money's in year one and previous 2, 3, maybe 4 if it's a particularly large project, and the money we have to send the lifeboat if there's no slack is in years 5 and 6. That means we now have to reorder based on the availability of money, not project schedule, some projects' timing, and one or several projects would likely be impeded and slowed down. I do understand your point that if we're spending it there, it does that. Yeah,
I mean, to make the
I said it very
argument,
articulately.
if we did it a second later, right? If we voted and then we said, these 12 projects are bad a second later, and then we reallocated it, there's no difference in the argument. I mean, it's the slack is a slack is a slack. If there's some in there, there's some in there. If there's not.
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, what I would say the difference is and there could be a theoretical world in which the slack naturally disappears. That could happen. What I'm telling you is currently we have slack. And we as staff consider that a very good thing to be able to keep projects on schedule. If you all spend it all, the theoretical world has become the world, and the slack is actually gone. So the example you're talking about could happen, but it has not. And we don't anticipate that it's going to happen. So yes, your example could take place. However, we believe there's a low likelihood of it taking place. However, if you spend it all, it has taken place, and we are now there. And the slack is fully gone, and when the next one comes in over, you can cancel it, or you can take money from a future round of smart scale, and then we'll have to impact most likely the schedules of several other projects, not based on when they can be delivered, but based on the availability of money, which has inflationary effects and other things of that nature that we've sought to avoid through the full funding policy.
Mr. Donahue, I feel as though we've had a fairly a robust discussion. Well, it's important, and I will say that this board has made many transformative decisions over these past few years, particularly when it comes to accountability and transparency with Smart Scale, the P3 reforms, just to name 2. And as part of this, going through the Smart Scale process, we now have a window into the process that we really didn't have before. That is actually a really good thing, and we are just trying to work through it so that we are managing, we are being good stewards of taxpayer money as we are trying to identify, fund, and complete the best projects that we can, recognizing we have very limited resources. So I think going through this process really is very, very important. I think the points you've raised are significant and meaningful to the process, and we're going to have to work through some of this. Somebody mentioned uniquely imperfect yesterday. So it is uniquely imperfect, but we want to get there, I will just say. And I will say the commissioner, going back many years to try to find the source of how Route 7 actually ended up to be where it is today, is also important. I will tell you that the entire staff wants to get there with us. So we are all on the same page. It might get a little bumpy along the way, but there is a true commitment to being transparent. True. So with that, I think, Mr. Donahue, even though we have a few more weeks with you with Barney, he's still the point person in my office for recommendations for how we can continue to make this process better. So, we can send all of our recommendations to you. We'll work through it. You're going to be bringing back projects to us so we can evaluate it. And we may be amending some of our earlier decisions. Ms. Hines.
I know you're trying to wrap up. I just want to raise one other issue which really hasn't come up, which is, so we're going to look at these 12 projects, and I think it's probably fair to say that about all 12 of these projects, we now know way more than when they were first submitted.
Correct.
And so if I was a locality listening to this and next month my project's on the list, it would seem to me that there's one other question that I might, as a local person, want to ask, which is, That project, which is now more expensive, out of scope, whatever, is actually a higher priority to me than the stuff I just submitted into Smart Scale. Can one of the choices be that I choose to resubmit it and withdraw one of the projects that I submitted, because this one that I thought was already funded is actually a higher priority for my community? And I think that would be a fair question, given where we are in timing, for people to raise. And so I just wanted to put that on the table. I don't know what the resolution should be, but I think it's a question we ought to figure out what we want the answer to be.
I think we should consider that as we're putting this together. That's a really good point.
Madam Chair, one thing.
Mr. Dodson.
I'm probably the least knowledgeable person here, but they get it. Okay? I mean, being in government, being in business many years, and I talked to them in my orientation. You know, you have an issue, an issue had to be handled. I think they get it, and they, not trying to defend them, they're experienced people, but a lot of times, sometimes government people overreact to something that happens negatively, and I think the leadership of VDOT gets it. Thank you.
Okay. With that, let me see. Mr. Commissioner, do you have anything else under your items? Okay.
I just have two very quick items. First of all, I see Barbara from the Port in the back of the room. I do just want to provide the CTB with an update on one project that we're working on with the Port of Virginia. It is listed in our 6-year plan under our section about Port of Virginia and railroad improvements serving the port. It's a project called the Commonwealth Railway Marshalling Yard Expansion. It's a $24 million project which has $17 million of REF funding on it. When the 6-year plan was originally developed, we were working directly with two sub-grantees, Commonwealth Railway and also the City of Norfolk, who's going to be doing some utility relocation. Under the agreement, we've actually, we're going to be working with the port to be the conduit of funding to those two organizations as well, who, because the port will be managing the overall interface for the project. So right now we're working with the port on those agreements and hope to get those in place. It's a very important project to the port to help support their future expansion. Just very quickly as well, there's been a little bit in the news lately about the Metro Safety Commission, and I just wanted to give you all an update that we're working very closely with the MSC right now, who is preparing to submit their final application materials to Federal Transit Administration. There's a deadline of September 30th for them to do so, and at a board meeting last week, their board authorized their executive director to submit all those final application materials, which FTA then has released a news release saying that that would then begin the transition process for the MSC to become certified by April. So it's good news, but we are continuing to monitor progress because of the potential impacts that it has on all of our federal transit funding if that group is not certified by April of 2019. But the news that came out last week is actually a very good sign of progress. So that's all I have for my two updates.
Thank you.
Just have one to bring forward to the board. Back in December of 2017, the board delegated the authority to the Commissioner of Highways to enter into an agreement with Maryland State Highway Administration, Virginia Tourism for the Nice Bridge across the Rappahannock. At that point in time, that agreement was signed to be able to move that project forward, to be able to secure the right-of-way associated with that on behalf of the Maryland on the Virginia side. On August 30th, I did execute an amendment to that contract or agreement, and what that change was just how we would move forward in the procurement of the property associated with the parkland to be able to assist King George County in securing that parkland. So that's the only amendment, that substantive change. There was no other change to dollar amount or any other terms and agreements with the amendment or the agreement.
Any questions? Okay, as for me, the first thing I would just like to say is it has been a true pleasure to be in the Stanton District, to be here in Winchester, and I just really wanted to thank Dixon and Kay Whitworth for a lovely event affair last night, and I met so many wonderful people, may I say. And to Randy Kaiser, I don't know if he's in the room, but Randy, just thank you very, very much for all of your help. And for also providing transportation for Marshall to get back to Richmond so she can get to North Carolina. So thank you very, very much. I just wanted Carol to perhaps go over the dates of our next meeting. Oh, Mr. Dodson just stepped out. Maybe I'll do this next. Well, it doesn't matter. Go ahead.
Our next meeting is in October, and it's going to take place right before the Innovation Conference. So our workshop is going to be October 29th, and our action meeting is going to be the morning of October 30th. If you'll recall, you all got an email from me a couple weeks ago asking about your dates and whether you'd be able to stay for the conference, and it is going to be in Norfolk. We do have a dinner that we're putting together Monday evening, and I hope to have some more details about that soon. So that's where we are.
I am going over a draft agenda right now, which I will make sure you all get as soon as possible so you can decide, you know, when you might want to, or how long you might want to stay or participate. I know Mr. Connors is going to be participating in the summit. So anyway, I will get that done this week so that you all will get that. Also, at your desk today, there is a sheet. And the intention of this is really to get from you your priorities for subcommittees and your participation in them. Some members have come to me, and I've had this discussion with our vice chair, Mr. Whitworth, about trying to find time to hold our committee meetings. And the recommendation that has been brought to my attention is that we set aside an hour and a half on the workshop day, the first day, for committee meetings, task forces, ad hoc meetings, committee meetings to take place, which means for those of us who serve on 2 committees, we're asking you to rank them, to rank which committee you would be your preference, where you would like to serve. So we'll ask you to submit that to us. We want you to serve where you want to be. I will also ask, people are bringing me ideas about additional subcommittees, so if you have a recommendation for that, please put that in there, and if you have a re-recommendation for that, please submit that as well. And some, you know, that right now we have a utility task force. I learned from Mr. Williams last night that that has not really come together yet. So that will be a priority, and I believe our deputy commissioner, is he still, oh, there he is. So you've already spoken, and so we'll go ahead and move forward with that piece. And there probably will be more task forces, you know, revenue sharing, with your advisory group on transit funding. So there'll be many more opportunities, and if you're willing to share on that, we would like to know that as well. And then we will let you all know kind of the results of that. But that way, we kind of know when the committees are meeting, and everybody should have an hour and a half. So with that, Mr. Connors, would you just like to give a summary from the technology meeting this morning, or any highlights?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Secretary. And first of all, thank you to staff who are doing great work in the area of innovation and technology. Lynn started off the meeting by giving us an update on what she's focused on, what she and the Secretary are focused on, and that is data analytics, broadband and infrastructure, and autonomous systems, and the common thread throughout all these, which is primarily cybersecurity, protecting all this. And I would suggest that maybe she give a brief to the full committee in more detail about some of those items we brought up today. But a good start, good focus, and I look forward to continuing that great work. We had a briefing from Jennifer DeBrule about integrated mobility and basically mobility sharing.
Which was so exciting.
Well, a hint of the future of transit, I think, embedded in there. So I would also suggest she give us, or Jennifer, y'all give us a briefing on that study and what you're seeing. I mean, I learned a lot in the TSDAC subcommittee about the importance of transit. I think, quite frankly, we've got to invest more in transit. And more in this technology, this mobility sharing technology and platform. And lastly, we had a briefing from Marteza of the P3 office about fiber study and broadband analysis and how we're going to play a role in the governor's broadband initiative to help him deploy broadband in underserved and rural areas throughout Virginia. So good meeting, fast-paced. Always, we have too many items on the agenda. So I appreciate your being there, your participation, and also giving us a little extra time to conduct our business. But very, very good stuff. Thank you.
Do you want to just mention the Amtrak update we got yesterday?
At the Rail Committee, we provided the board with an update on Amtrak ridership in Virginia. We did see a dip earlier in the year, but actually the good news is we've actually seen that rebound somewhat. It's very consistent with where we've been with our 3-year average for ridership, and that was despite some very significant weather events and construction in the corridor, which was affecting on-time performance. We did also brief the board on our marketing program and some new work that we're doing with some additional market research in our customer base and also our non-customer base. And we also got an update from Amtrak themselves and their Senior Vice President of Marketing, who came to the meeting and provided the committee with an update of where Amtrak is from trying to develop a more robust marketing program to increase national ridership. So it was a good,
It was a great presentation.
Yeah.
I will just say that when I joined the board in 2014, there really, at that time, the subcommittees were not acting. And so slowly, over the last 4 years, we brought back rail and technology and innovation. We may consider a third, depending on recommendations from you all. But there's so much good work that takes place within the committees. So I just thank you. And I won't be able to go to them all now, and I'll just be an ad hoc member. And so I won't be a formal member of any committee. So anyway, just trying to keep up with all the good work that you're doing. Mr. Dodson and Mr. Miller, I know you all have been through some orientation programs. So if any feedback from you all?
Yes, Madam Secretary, I had a great time. The leadership was very congenial, informative. Commissioner had lunch together. It was a great time. I mean, I showed up and said, "Do I have a parking space?" And the attendant says, "Well, you always have a parking space." I spent real
We can fix that.
I got the first I got the closest parking space to the church, on Easter Sunday, So it was real nice.
And you have Mr. Connor as your mentor in this?
Yes, I didn't have to call him at all. I'll tell you, my teacher sent his people out, but I really enjoyed it.
Better off if we
It gave me a
don't
lot
talk.
of reading to do, okay, which I haven't done all of it, okay? I'm sorry, gang, but I've done most of it, okay. Yes, Hap, what was your response?
Said you're better off if we don't talk.
Okay, thank you. But it was really well done, well organized, and saw everybody, and very congenial. Thanks a lot. Appreciate their time.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Secretary,
Of course, you have Dixon Whitworth, so.
Dixon held me down and whispered in my ear about 4 hours. I haven't been to Richmond for an orientation, but I did have an advantage of knowing a little bit about the subject. I haven't been here before, but I will get up there to get some more because there's just lots I don't know. So I appreciate the welcoming attitude of you and the rest of the board members, and I'm glad to be here and help in any way that I can.
Thank you. And I mention that because that's the result of another ad hoc committee that had come together to make sure we are bringing people onto the board and informing them and letting them know their role rather than just coming on like most of us. Mr. Johnson.
Madam Secretary, if I may, when I came on the board in December, I came up a day early and was fire hosed for an entire day by the senior staff who did an excellent job in giving me all kinds of information. I did show up with 6 pages listed single-spaced of acronyms. I'm glad to see that the commission, led by Dixon, put most of those acronyms to use in the new manual that's out. So I appreciate the work that was done by that ad hoc committee. It's been very useful and very successful, and I'm glad the 2 new board members have had the advantage of being able to participate.
I have had a few people on the board say they wanted to go through it as well.
Chair Lady, just two things, actually. I'm ready for the quiz on the highway laws. I read that whole book last night. I'm ready for that. And Mr. Johnson, I was the guy who insisted on the acronym list about 7 years ago, Because after I heard about 30 things, and I kept asking, what is that, what is that, what is that? I said, can y'all just put together a list of acronyms? So finally, we do have that, and that is very helpful.
Great. Okay.
Just a reminder to everybody, if you don't bring this, I recommend you do so. I referred to it twice yesterday and picked up one acronym that's not in here, and I've already passed it on. And I bet you that not everybody picked up on, it was one of the headlines. It was, remember we had the PPT, but there's a VPPTA, and that's not in here. And so we're getting it. I talked to Mortesa. Anyhow, but everybody, if you find something that's not in here, this is a working document, and we need, every year we'll update it. And so we need everybody's help. Other than that, it will help all of us to read the first 25 pages, because that's really where the essence of our organization is best laid out.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure Mr. Gorzinski's probably streaming this.
I'm sure.
So, just a shout out to him for all his leadership on that as well. With that, we'll go into our action meeting. And so we have a public comment period. We limit the comments to 3 minutes. I admit to people that it is very hard for me not to respond to you as you're speaking, but I will refrain from doing so, as will our board. It's really a time for us to listen to you. And so with that, I think I only have 2 people who've signed up, and you're going to have to Leaf Wathen? I apologize, I just could not read your last name.
It's Leif Watney, yes. Madam Secretary, that's quite all right. It's not the first time my name has been mispronounced.
I have met you before.
We have met
Yes, it's nice to see you again.
Likewise.
I know your face. I apologize.
No need to. Madam Secretary, members of the board, good morning. My name is Leif Watney. I am a Fairfax County resident where I live with my wife and 2 sons. I'm a civil engineer and I work for the American Concrete Pavement Association. My background also includes just under a decade with the Federal Highway Administration, and I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to address the board. As you know, the Commonwealth spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year on pavement, and the overwhelming majority of that expenditure is on asphalt, more than 95%. According to public bid records, a significant percentage of paving projects awarded are for lettings with 2 or fewer bidders. In other words, with little to no competition. And this is a situation we believe can be rectified to the benefit of Commonwealth taxpayers, and it involves inter-industry competition. There are substantial economic benefits of inter-industry competition. MIT, at the urging of industry, undertook a comprehensive multivariate analysis of DOT bid pricing on 10 years of data, 298,000 pay items from 47 state DOTs. The results clearly show that, and I quote, increasing competition between paving material industries, lower paving costs for both asphalt and concrete jobs, and is likely to result in significant savings for DOTs and taxpayers, end quote. There's a reason competition is foundational to the American way of doing business. It pays dividends. Now, our industry has been in recent discussions with VDOT staff about how to better capitalize on this free market dynamic between paving industries, and we would like to thank Chief Engineer Garrett Moore and the department for their earnest engagement in these discussions. We are encouraged by VDOT's interest in ways to extend the reach of Virginia's paving dollars. However, we urge the Commonwealth Transportation Board to reinforce VDOT's commitment to this significant opportunity. Maintaining the status quo is not an equitable and cost-efficient approach. An aging roadway network, growing needs, and shrinking resources demands a rethinking of how highway dollars are stewarded. And we know there are opportunities for improvement. American Society of Civil Engineers 2015 and 2017 infrastructure report cards underscore this. We need to take advantage of all the tools available to us to ensure that taxpayers get the best bang from the highway dollar. And we firmly believe that the introduction of a competing pavement solution is an important step toward that end. I'd like to underscore that this is not about product being better than the other, that one product being better than the other. It's about providing the best value. Taxpayers benefit from the presence of both pavement types, expressed primarily through lower unit prices, but also via enhanced quality and accelerated innovation. To be clear, there are no engineering reasons why concrete pavement cannot be a part of any agency's program, including VDOT's. Concrete pavement is successfully used in neighboring states like North Carolina and West Virginia, as well as in dozens of states across the country. The reemergence of a viable concrete pavement industry in Virginia to check and compete with the well-entrenched and dominant asphalt paving industry is beneficial to Commonwealth taxpayers. The concrete pavement industry stands ready to compete and deliver the most cost-effective, safe, and sustainable payments possible for the Commonwealth road user. We look forward to working with this department and finding the best way forward toward creating a healthy two-pavement system in the Commonwealth. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board.
Matthijs. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kate Matthijs. I'm with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and I appreciate the opportunity to come to you today to share NVTC's perspective on the process for funding transit capital projects, which I know you were briefed on yesterday. I'd like to thank each of you, Secretary Valentine, Director Mitchell, and all of the CTB members for your dedication to transit and transit funding throughout the Commonwealth. So Northern Virginia has a vested interest in the new state transit capital funding approach that DRPT is putting forward. Our region's economic vitality depends on transit, and it's more than just Metro Rail and Metro Bus. In Northern Virginia, it includes local and commuter services provided by our 6 local bus systems, as well as VRE. The state capital program is important to our systems, and the annual allocation for DRPT's capital programs provides the necessary and predictable funding for our systems so they can replace old facilities, upgrade dated technology, and maintain a reliable fleet. The existing allocation approach allows our transit systems to do asset management planning. They can predict when a building, a fleet, or technology can be repaired or replaced. And so Northern Virginia recognizes the difficult position which DRPT has been placed by changes required to law. And in all sincerity, we really, truly appreciate DRPT's engagement with stakeholders throughout this process. I'm actually on TISDOC along with Mr. Connors, and they've absolutely listened to all of us on what is a reasonable approach given the new requirements. But this process will change the landscape on how local transit systems plan their vehicle replacements, do their building repairs, and do technology upgrades. Currently, transit systems manage their systems with fleet and asset management plans to make sure they've got the reliable vehicles and they're purchased on time to replace old ones and make sure that technology is meeting their customer needs. So the new process will question the predictability of funding for replacement cycles and may actually affect the reliability of our systems. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place for transit prioritization, especially for major capital expansions, and this is a place where I think DRPT really got it right. When you talk about new major expansion, doing through like a smart scale, which they are proposing, I think is right on the mark. But I want to recognize that that only represents less than 20% of DRPT's annual capital funding. The vast majority of those funds are not for expansion, but really about state of good repair and replacement. So I just want to remember that in the big picture. But really moving forward, I want us to collectively recognize that we do not want to forget that we actually see a shortfall in transit funding coming up. While there was a prediction of an imminent fiscal cliff, yes, that has gone away, but the need to replenish those transit funds in the future has not. A loss of the funds will threaten the transit services across the Commonwealth, potentially reducing or eliminating routes and services. So I want to make sure we don't forget and keep our eyes off of that prize as we move forward. Once again, thank you so much. Transit is definitely an important part of the Commonwealth, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
She's always good.
It had nothing to do with the timing, of course. Would anybody else here want to make a comment? Okay, with that, do I have a motion about the minutes?
Moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, and I will also just say at this moment, and Mr. Allen, make sure I'm saying this properly, we do have Jerry Stinson from Bristol participating electronically. The plane was not able to get to him, at the start of this meeting to bring him here. So I can ask everyone to give, do I need to specifically ask Mr. Stinson to record his vote?
Yes, just for purposes of the record, because the rest of the meeting is being live streamed. I think that there's plenty of public access, but for the people in the room and the people who are listening live stream, they would need to know the vote of Mr. Stinson.
Mr. Stinson, did you approve the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. Is that scary to look at?
Well, you know, when I first looked at it, I was like, and then it was Jerry.
Because Jerry, we can all see you. It's very odd. But anyway, welcome and thank you for participating. There was legislation passed this year that allows electronic participation under certain circumstances. And so this seemed like a reasonable opportunity to use this. So welcome. I hope that you feel a part of all this.
I do. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Hofrichter.
Morning.
Morning.
I bring before you two resolutions. The first one deals with changing the land use permit regulations to make them consistent with actions taken by the by the General Assembly at the last session. In that action, the General Assembly changed the fees for wireless support structures in the right-of-way to $1,000, $3,000, and $5,000, depending on height. These are annual fees. Our regulations contained fees of $24,000 straight. So this would make our regulations consistent with the law.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
Aye.
Thank you.
The next resolution is a request from Spotsylvania County to discontinue a short portion of Route 631. This road goes right behind their courthouse and through their courthouse complex, and they would like to put up some gates and provide other security. The roadway actually sits within 10 feet of the courthouse building. They want a little bit of added security, so they would like us to discontinue the roadway so it falls completely under their authority.
Move to approve.
Okay. All those in favor? Oh, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mitchell?
Morning. You have before you a CTP resolution that includes policy and guidelines related to the implementation of funding and governance reforms for the Washington Metropolitan Area Transportation Authority. Enactment clauses of Chapter 854 of the 2018 Virginia Acts of Assembly includes a number of requirements for the CTB to potentially withhold funding from WMATA in the event of several scenarios. And the guidelines in front of you provide a detailed description of how that process would occur and how the criteria that the CTB would use. Specifically, it relates to guidelines about the participation of alternates on the WMATA board, the adoption of a detailed 6-year plan by the WMATA board, adoption of a strategic plan by WMATA, and also a 3% cap on the growth of Virginia's annual operating assistance as well. I do want to note that the NVTC board, which is made up of the local elected officials in Virginia, did pass a resolution at their last meeting on September 6th that endorsed and acknowledged these guidelines as well. So we do recommend that approval of these today.
Any discussion?
Might. The question that I'm hoping that you can answer publicly here today has to do with the issue of whether a major bus expansion the creation of BRT dedicated lanes across the region in Virginia, whether that would qualify in the same way that, say, the opening of Potomac Yards station. I will just say, from what I know about what's going on in the region, there is a concern that we're really not going to be doing a whole lot more in terms of heavy rail, and that how we're going to move more people, how we're going to compete to move more people is going to be through improving bus service. But that shows up mostly as a operating expense, not as a capital expense. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate that.
The policy does outline that major capital expansions, which I think a BRT project, for example, would fall under, would not affect that, the calculation of that operating cost cap. The something, though, that I would say is more related perhaps to incremental expansion of bus service perhaps would. The policy does also mention that occasionally, I guess it's every 3 years or so, there are semi-regular updates to WMATA's, the inputs into WMATA's formula, and those inputs do take into account the amount of service that's within every jurisdiction, as well as population and population density and a number of other factors. I do think that some of that would probably be captured by any potential inputs into that formula as well. So,
I appreciate that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin?
Morning, board members. Michael McLaughlin, Chief of Rail Transportation for DRPT. I'm here today to ask your consideration of a grant for the Virginia Inland Port, which many of you visited yesterday. As the Secretary noted, it has increased 21% in 1 year. Their container volume has doubled in 5 years. So they did put in an original grant application in 2018 for $3.9 million of rail enhancement funds. They are expanding that to $7.72 million to build new track, also additional turnouts and improved container handling. This application is also in concert with an application for what is now called a build grant at the USDOT, formerly Tiger Grants. That is a very important application for the Commonwealth. And Barbara Nelson and her team have worked hard with DRPT on that application that went in the last couple months, and hopefully we'll hear by November on that application. So with that, I am here to request your approval of this REF grant application for $7.72 million for the Virginia Inland Port.
I make that motion.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I'd like to just address, appreciate everyone going yesterday. I've more than once stated that I think for both these rail access and economic access, it's important that those of us where the project is, that we need to be familiar with it. We need to go to it, talk to them, and I've made a point of doing that, and I'm sure others have too, but it was very important, I think, for all of us to see this yesterday. The rest of the story, I think Stan Crockett covered, is the vital role that this inland port plays to the state of Virginia, and more especially to this area. What he didn't tell you is the fact that right up the road, he mentioned the Procter & Gamble development in 600 acres that they're doing up there. Is going to be the largest North American manufacturing facility that they have, about 30 miles up the road, coming right down to our port. And this is critical. And so this is an opportunity to be able to meet that demand, expand that demand, and let the state of Virginia and our port participate in that new growth of business.
Thank you for saying that. I will say that the businesses that I've had and the manufacturers that I've been able to visit around the inland port are incredibly enthusiastic and important. and growing. So it is a tremendous opportunity for us. I would also just mention, well, I'll do the vote and I'll tell you one more thing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you. The governor had there are many, many different build opportunities, and some of you actually brought some of those opportunities to my office. And so we had 3, and this was one that the governor supported. Didn't want that to influence your vote, but important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Crockett and Barbara Nelson did a great job yesterday, by the way. Kim Pryor.
Madam Secretary, members of the board, I have 2 items for your consideration today. The first item is the amendment of 3 projects to the 6-year program. 2 are safety projects, and the third is funded with federal demonstration funds, and all are exempt from Smart Scale. And I recommend your approval.
Approve.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you. And the second item is my normal monthly transfers of surplus funds to ongoing projects, and I recommend your approval.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Donahue?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I have a resolution before you all today to adopt system performance measures for asset condition, reliability, and congestion. We met with most members one-on-one to walk through this. I apologize, Mr. Williams and Mr. Malbin. I believe we reached out to you all but weren't able to get a meeting in place. Again, as I noted in my previous discussions, we are required by federal law to report these at a certain time period. Our goal, however, is to develop more data-driven and rigorous process for developing these measures in the future, but we need to submit something to the federal government by October 1st. And so what we are asking for is your approval of what I'll call essentially kind of steady state measures for many of these that look at where we are today and essentially say that is our target. There is a second further be it resolved clause in this resolution directing the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment to develop the more data-driven approach as we've walked through you all through on safety and are currently in the process of developing. We will do that for reliability. We will do that for congestion and the other measures that are laid out in here. We just simply were not able to complete that work with the time frame in which the federal government required us to report this information. And so with that, we would ask for your approval of this.
Motion.
Any discussion? I'll just mention again, it's because we're going beyond the minimal. Yes, we're trying to really delve into the numbers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. You are not Lori Snyder.
No, ma'am, I am not, Lori.
Call me Laurie.
I'm just making sure everybody's awake, that's all. Morning, Mr. Walton.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have the next 3 items are all limited access breaks. The first one is in the Fredericksburg District in Stafford County. GAM Stafford LLC, a private developer, has requested a right-in, right-out break to build a right-in, right-out commercial entrance to their development, which is a little over half a mile from Interstate 95. We would ask for your approval of this request.
I move to approve.
All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye, Madam Chair.
The next item is a request actually from the city of Hampton to remove the limited access features along the Aberdeen Road to allow for the development of a former site of the Virginia School for the Blind, Deaf, and Multi-Disabled for proposed light industrial development, and we would ask for your approval of this request.
A motion we approve.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you.
Finally, Madam Secretary, the last item is the Northern Virginia District. It's in Fairfax County. It's a request to move the limited access line out so that a developer We will convey the property to the developer so the developer can build a sidewalk and other landscaping amenities for the development, and we would ask for you to approve this request.
Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Stinson.
My vote is aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. Mr. Lawson. So glad you could join us.
Glad to be here. So glad to be here. Today we have before you the resolution authorizing the issuance of the 2018 Garveys. As you recall, the last board meeting, Laura Falmer, Director of Financial Planning, presented to you the plan of sale. So the action today is to authorize the Secretary and staff acting on behalf of the Secretary to move forward with that sale. The resolution that's in your package does a number of things. It authorizes the Secretary, and again, staff acting on behalf of the Secretary to finalize the bond documents. It acknowledges that the bonds are limited obligations of the board and the Commonwealth. It sets forth the Secretary's responsibility in finalizing the terms of the bonds, working through Treasury. It authorizes, again, the posting of the notice of sale, the issuance of the finalization and the issuance of the preliminary official statement, which a copy of which is in the materials, again, largely in final form. The finalization of the POS in the form of the OS, the official statement upon this completion of the sale. It acknowledges the board's responsibilities, and which is through my office to provide the continuing disclosure that is required for the issuance of bonds. The issuance of the 6th supplemental indenture, which again supports the sale of this 6th series of Garveys, and then authorizes the CTB or the Secretary and staff acting through this on behalf of the Secretary to basically carry out everything else that's needed in order to complete the sale. Madam Secretary, I recommend approval.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moore. Good morning.
Morning, Madam Chairman and members of the board. I have a number of issues to bring up this morning, and we'll go ahead and get started. The first issue was briefed yesterday on delegation of authority, which I am recommending delegation to the Commissioner of Highways or his designee authority to enter into and execute agreements on behalf of the Commonwealth Transportation Board with U.S. government entities concerning Section 14 erosion protection projects.
Good. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. We have two limited access control changes having to do with projects. The first is limited access control change located in the Hampton Roads District. Coliseum Drive Extension Project will extend Coliseum Drive from Hampton Roads Center Parkway to Butler Farm Road, located in the city of Hampton. It's a modification of the limited access control along Hampton Roads Center Parkway to extend Coliseum Drive from the Hampton Roads Center to Butler Farm, as we talked about, with a 4-lane roadway, which will include a 10-foot shared use path on the west side and a 5-foot sidewalk on the east side with curb and gutter. Design public hearing was held on April 30th, 2018 at City Hall in Hampton, Virginia. The project was endorsed by the City Council by resolution and a letter from the Director of Public Works. Total estimate of the cost of the project is $5.5 million. Request approval by the CTB of the limited access modifications.
A motion we approve.
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
My vote is aye.
you, ma'am. The next and final limited access control change for his project located in Culpeper District is the Warrenton Southern Interchange Project will replace the existing interchange at Route 151729 Eastern Bypass and Route 151729 Business and Route 880 Lord Fairfax Drive with a grade separated interchange. It's located in Fauquier County. Modification of the limited access control along the west side of the existing interchange to accommodate the grade separated interchange that will replace those routes mentioned. The limited access on Lord Fairfax will have a break and a part of the limited access abandoned. The design public hearing was held on May 9th, 2017 at Lord Fairfax Community College in Warrenton, Virginia. The project was endorsed in a letter by the County Administrator of Fauquier County in July. Total estimate of the cost of the project is $23.9 million. Request approval by the CTB of the limited access modifications.
A second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The next 6 items are maintenance items and their local project namings for the board's consideration. The first is in Lynchburg District. It's from the Halifax County Board of Supervisors, Lynchburg District. Commemorative naming of the bridge on Route 716, Wolf Trap Road over Bannister River, Halifax County as the Calvin S. Powell Memorial Bridge. The Halifax County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and commemorate the life and service of Calvin S. Powell, who served in the United States Army and was an instrumental leader in the Wolf Trap community, providing jobs for young adults while teaching them character building and responsibility. The Halifax County Board of Supervisors wish to honor its native son with an enduring symbol of their affection for him and their abiding regard for his service to the community, to their community. VDOT supports the request.
Mr. Dodson?
Yes, ma'am. Obviously, this is a great achievement by this individual, and I recommend the approval.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Mr. Allen made, Mr. Stinson, you don't have to stand, you can just tell us.
Thank you. My vote is in the affirmative, ma'am.
Thank you.
Number 2, also from Lynchburg District, the City Council of the City of Danville, commemorative naming of U.S. Route 29 Danville Expressway from U.S. 29 Business to the northern city limits, City of Danville as the Wendell O. Scott Sr. Memorial Highway. The City Council of the City of Danville is requesting that the CTB honor and memorialize Wendell O. Scott Sr. for his accomplishments, courage, and inspiration through his career as a NASDAQ driver, immortalized roles in movies and on television, and for the Wendell Scott Foundation's efforts to improve the lives of youth with education-based programs and initiatives. Wendell O. Scott passed away on December 23, 1990. Mr. Scott was the only African American to be a team owner and driver at NASCAR's highest level, earning the respect and admiration of fans and competitors. Overcoming racial discrimination and unfair practices with courage, honor, and tenacity, he went on to have a 13-year NASCAR career that included many top 5 and top 10 finishes. VDOT supports this request.
Dodson.
Yes, ma'am. This is a wonderful expression, I believe. As a teenager, I'm not a NASCAR fan too much, but Wendell Scott was definitely in the papers a lot. Obviously, with the racism and segregation at the times, this is back in the 50s and 60s too, and 70s too. But he's somebody I always recognized, and when I heard about this, it was fulfilled. And one thing I asked Mr. Moore is that this is the Danville Bypass, basically. And this is I don't know too many people on Danville City Council, looking forward to meet them in the future, but as y'all well know, maybe the ones who follow the American Civil War, Danville was the last capital city of the Confederacy as Jefferson Davis was retreating, and actually gained some notice by the largest Confederate flag in the country going on it's established on a private property around the bypass. So we'll have Wendell O. Scott Sr. Memorial Highway on the Danville Bypass, which for many years was something that the Danville community and people traveling south down 29, I'm included, loved, when they built it. And with the other event of having that Confederate flag, it's a real, how can you say, a memorable moment. I'm looking forward to, being there when they had the naming. And I would suggest that we approve the resolution.
All those in favor, please stand. Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye, ma'am.
The whole time? Okay. Yes, Mr. Moore.
The third one from Prince George County, Richmond District. Commemorative naming of the roundabout at the intersection of Route 634, Allen Road, and Route 630, Jefferson Park Road, and Bull Hill Road, Prince George's County as Osbat Circle. Prince George's County wishes to honor and memorialize Captain Jesse A. Osbat for his service and ultimate sacrifice as a member of the United States Army. Captain Osbat, while assigned to the 168th Brigade Support Battalion, 214th Fire Brigade, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, died on May 20th, 2012 from wounds suffered during an enemy attack of his unit in Tarin Kowt, Afghanistan. VDOT supports this request.
All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Bland and Wythe Counties, Bristol District, commemorative naming of U.S. Route 52 from the Wythe County, Carroll County line through Wythe County, continuing through Bland County to the West Virginia state line as the Veterans Memorial Highway. Wythe County and Bland County wish to honor the heroic services of the veterans of the United States Armed Forces for securing the freedoms celebrated in America and remember the sacrifices made by the men and women that have served their country. VDOT supports this request.
Stinson, would you like to make that motion?
I would, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion.
All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye, ma'am.
From the Patrick County Board of Supervisors, Salem District, commemorative naming of the bridge on U.S. Route 58, Jeb Stuart Highway over Spoon Creek, Patrick County as the Specialist for Frederick C. Bullington Jr. Memorial Bridge. The Patrick County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and commemorate the life, service, and ultimate sacrifice of United States Army Specialist 4 Frederick C. Bullington Jr., who was wounded in action on May 7th, 1996 and later, or 1966, and later died on May 30th, 1966 during the Vietnam War. The Patrick County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor its native son with an enduring symbol of their affection for him and their abiding regard for his service and sacrifice. VDOT supports this request.
To approve.
All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye, ma'am.
From Page County Board of Supervisors, Stanton District. Commemorative naming of the bridge on U.S. Route 40, Stonewall Jackson Memorial Highway over Compton Creek, Page County as the USMC Sergeant Richard T. Brumback Memorial Bridge. The Page Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and commemorate the life, service, and ultimate sacrifice of United States Marine Corps Sergeant Richard T. Brumback, who was killed in action during World War II on the island of Bougainville on November 1st, 1943. The Page County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor its native son with an enduring symbol of their affection for him and their abiding regard for his service and sacrifice. VDOT supports this request.
Secretary, I make this motion. This was in the Pacific Campaign in New Guinea. Mr. Sergeant Brumback was 25 years old and he died.
Second. All those in favor, please stand.
My vote is aye, Madam Chair.
Madam Chairman, moving on to the next item. This is the request for approval and authorization for the Commissioner of Highways or designee to execute letters of agreement with WMATA. This was briefed yesterday. It's my pleasure to announce to the board that last night or late yesterday evening, we actually reached a verbal agreement. They accepted our 3 final edits on our letter agreement. They did have a request, and I'll request the board that we change the project principals agreement to just call it a project partnering charter, and that's what it took, and it looks like we have a verbal agreement, barring somebody else jumping in the middle, we hope to sign here in the coming week. So we think we have this together. So our recommendation is to grant the delegation to the commissioner or his designee for both of these documents.
Hopefully.
Any further discussion? All those, Mr. Williams.
Out of an abundance of caution, I was briefed on this by Garrett and fully supported it. I do notice that a client of mine is in one of the entities involved, so out of abundance of caution, I would abstain from the vote.
Thank you. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? 1 abstention. And Mr. Stinson?
My vote is aye.
Thank you. I think you're done.
No, 2 more.
Oh,
These
you
are
do?
extra. Mr. Caples is.
Okay, well, I was trying to give you a break, but go
I
ahead.
appreciate it. I could use it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. The next 2 are 2 projects for award. One is a state of good repair project, and one is a safety project. Neither of these are smart scale. But I do want to preface this by saying both of these are, one more than the other, are over the original estimate in the budget. They are within our confidential engineer's estimate that is done at central office, and one had 6 bids on it, the other had 10. And the reason I want to preface this is that we believe, we've stated probably for a couple of years, we were looking for an inflection point. We think that the cost of doing business is accelerating beyond what may have been estimated a year or 2. We don't know that yet, but we think we're at the early stage of a curve turning up. And so what does that mean policy-wise for things like state of repair? It means that if this happens, if this trend continues, we basically do less repair and rehab for the same budget. And the safety, these aren't things that we basically moved down the line. We don't have people competing against each other. We're moving down a priority list. But that's what we will be watching this very closely. We'll be letting you know where things are happening. We're paying a little more this year, for instance, for asphalt paving. Most of that doesn't come out of the range, but it's creeping, and we will keep you informed of where we think this is going. Unfortunately, in bids, you're sometimes looking back to try to project forward, and we're also looking at things like commodity prices, labor tightening, and some other things. So trying to put the Ouija board together to project out where this might put it, and we will continue to report to you. That being said, the 2 projects we do recommend going forward. One is N46, project 0081, 793 C501, B60, B661. It's replacing structurally deficient bridges over Route 686 in Smith County. The bridges are in VDOT's Bristol district and are located approximately 0.6 miles from Route 622 to the west and 3.3 miles from Route 683 to the east. It's essentially they're structurally deficient bridges that need to be replaced. We do recommend the award.
Mr. Stinson?
Madam Chair, I'd make the motion that we accept the
The same situation that we find ourselves in with VDOT with prices is the commercial sector is experiencing the exact same thing. Our people now, at any price, they're just not there. And of course, that's going to make price creep. Truck drivers that were making $20 an hour a year ago are making $30 an hour now. That's the sort of increases they're experiencing. They've certainly got to pass it along in their bids, and this is just something we're going to have to live with. It's a good thing. The economy's so great that everybody's so busy, but at the same time, that industry has some severe labor shortages, severe for skilled labor, equipment operators. We're going
Notice the team going like this.
We're going to continue to experience it.
Yes, thank you for those comments. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson, thank you.
The second project is a safety project. The purpose is to improve safety and add capacity to Cedar Level Road. The purpose will be accomplished through widening the road from 2 lanes to 3 12-foot lanes with a center 2-way turn lane and bike lanes and sidewalks. The new roadway section will include curb and gutter and underground drainage. The statewide planning system classifies Route 9047 Cedar Level Road as urban minor arterial. Existing pavement averages 22 feet for the 2-lane typical, and I won't go into the rest of the details, but again, it is a safety project, fixed completion date of 2020. This one had, I believe, 10 bidders on it, and this one was a little bit more in line with the estimates but still creeping up, and recommend for award.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Mr. Stinson?
Aye.
All I have, ma'am.
Are you sure?
I think so. I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Give me a...
New business, Mr. Whitworth.
Yes, Madam Secretary. We have just taken action on the sale of Garvey bonds. There is one thing that needs to be done, and that is we can't sell those bonds until we have a designated secretary. And consequently, the task force of the caucus of the leadership is prepared to recommend that our secretary designee be Allison DeTung, who is the next senior person around the table. Therefore, I would like to offer this motion. Whereas there are numerous legal documents and other instruments. By the way, I forgot to tell you this, didn't I? Numerous legal documents and other instruments which must be attested by an individual on behalf of the board, and whereas it is not always possible to have said documents or instruments attested to by the chairman, now therefore it is resolved that Allison DeTung be appointed as Secretary of the Commonwealth Transportation Board with the power to attest the chairman's signature and documents of the board. Be it further resolved that this appointment serves to rescind all prior appointments to the position of Secretary of the Board. I make that motion.
Second. I will entertain any discussion from anyone except Allison DeTong.
Call the question.
Any comments? Thank you. I will say that. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Allison, recorder vote?
Mr. Simpson, did you vote? I'm sorry.
He did.
Okay.
My vote was aye, ma'am.
Thank you. Allison, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Pay is doubled.
When I joined, I asked for hazardous duty pay. So. Any other new business? Okay, with that, we will adjourn. I just thank you all very much. Please be safe, and it was wonderful to be with you. Adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. You're so much fun to be around.